The lights dimmed, and our living room transformed into a dance floor. John and I swayed to our song, surrounded by the warm glow of love and celebration marking our 5th anniversary. It was perfect, yet a whisper in my heart confessed unrest, a craving for something different. Days turned into weeks, and the monotony of our routines began to weigh on me. Then, Alex walked into the office, his charm like a fresh breeze in a stale room. Flirting was harmless, I reasoned, ignoring the guilt nipping at my conscience. John, ever thoughtful, surprised me with plans for a weekend getaway. But as he spoke, my mind wandered to Alex, to the excitement he promised. I feigned enthusiasm, hating myself for the deceit. "I have to stay late at work," I lied smoothly, the words tasting bitter. John believed me, his trust a heavy mantle. That night, under the guise of overtime, I met Alex. The thrill was intoxicating, addictive. But life has a way of unraveling lies. John showed up at my office one evening, a surprise dinner in hand, only to find my desk empty. Panic seized me as I imagined his discovery, but my colleague covered for my absence, a lie to protect another lie. The affair escalated, boldness replacing caution. Alex and I met openly, laughter mingling with whispers, each encounter erasing boundaries I once held sacred. As I lived this double life, the foundation of my marriage to John, built on trust and love, cracked under the weight of my choices. The thrill of the new shadowed the value of the true, leading me down a path I never imagined I'd tread. The evening air felt heavy with anticipation as John, my husband of 5 years, slid a small, elegantly wrapped box across the dinner table toward me. Inside was a necklace, breathtaking and undoubtedly expensive. "Happy anniversary," he said, his voice a mixture of pride and affection. Accepting it, I felt a wave of guilt wash over me. The necklace was beautiful, but its weight felt like a chain of my own secrets. Later that night, I left my phone unlocked on the kitchen counter, a careless mistake. I woke to find John, silent and distant, preparing for work. He didn't mention the messages from Alex he must have seen, but the air between us had shifted. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that now felt like a goodbye to the trust we once shared. As the days passed, John's late nights at the office became more frequent. "The project is demanding more time," he'd say, but his eyes held a weariness I hadn't seen before. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that my affair with Alex was a temporary escape from the monotony of marriage. But deep down, I knew I was walking a dangerous path. One evening, John gently suggested couples counseling. "I feel like we're drifting apart," he admitted. I dismissed the idea, too afraid to face the reality of what I was doing. My relationship with Alex had become a reckless pursuit of excitement, and I wasn't ready to give it up. The planning of a secret weekend away with Alex was thrilling yet terrifying. I lied to John, claiming a girls' trip. But the thrill of deception was short-lived. While packing, I missed a hotel receipt falling out of my purse. John found it later, yet he said nothing. His silence was louder than any confrontation. In the mirror, I saw a woman tangled in her own lies, wearing a necklace that felt more like a shackle. John's silent gathering of evidence, his retreat into work, and his unspoken hurt were clear. Yet, I was too caught up in the moment, too entangled in my own desires to see the end approaching. The realization hit me too late. The distance between us was not just emotional but a chasm widened by my own actions. The moment John handed me the envelope, my heart sank. It wasn't just any envelope. It was thick, heavy with content, and sealed with a finality that made my stomach churn. I had been careless, too wrapped up in the thrill of my affair with Alex to notice the signs. The signs that John, my husband of 5 years, wasn't just the loving, forgiving man I took him for. He was also smart, observant, and, as I was about to find out, incredibly decisive. "I need you to look at these." John's voice was calm, almost eerily so. There was no anger in his tone, no raised voice or accusation. Just a quiet resignation that scared me more than any shouting match we'd ever had. Inside the envelope were photos, reports, a tangible record of my betrayal. Photos of me and Alex at various rendezvous points, laughing, touching, clearly more than just colleagues. The private investigator John had hired had been thorough, leaving no room for doubt or denial. How long? That was all John asked, his eyes not leaving mine. The question wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything: our marriage, my lies, the life we built together. I had no words. Any excuse or apology seemed futile, insignificant in the face of the evidence laid out before us. John had already moved beyond the need for answers. He had been organizing his life, our lives, for what came next. The evidence wasn't just for confrontation, it was for the divorce proceedings. He had been securing his assets, consulting with a lawyer, preparing for a future without me. "I'm filing for divorce," John stated, his voice steady. "And I'll be seeking full custody of the children." It wasn't a discussion, it was a declaration of his next steps. The shock of his words hit me like a physical blow. I had underestimated him, thought of him as too loving, too gentle to ever leave, much less fight back. But here he was, not just ready to leave but to take everything we had built together, including our children. "Why?" I finally managed to whisper, not sure if I was asking about the divorce, the custody, or the meticulous planning that had led to this moment. John looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of the man I married, the man I had betrayed. "Because I have to think about what's best for our children. And right now, that's a life without this chaos." He left then, leaving me with the envelope, the photos, and a realization of just how much I had lost. Not just my husband, but my family, my home, my sense of who I was. John's decisiveness in that moment was a wake-up call. I had thought he was too loving to leave, but I was wrong. He loved our children too much to stay. As I sat across from John in the sterile, too bright room of his lawyer's office, the reality of my situation finally hit me. John, the man I married, the father of my children, looked at me with a resolve I had never seen before. "I've been in consultation with a lawyer for weeks," he said, his voice steady, devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact, one that shattered any illusion of reconciliation I might have harbored. I pleaded with him, tears streaming down my face. "Please, John, can't we try counseling? Can't we work this out for the kids?" But his gaze remained unfaltering, his decision made. The man I thought I knew, the one I believed would always forgive me, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man wounded too deeply by betrayal. The divorce proceedings began with a swiftness that left me reeling. John's lawyer was efficient, presenting evidence of my infidelity so overwhelming it silenced any defense I might have offered. Photos, messages, witness statements, the accumulation of my indiscretions laid bare for the court to see. When the judge ruled in John's favor, granting him full custody of our children and the majority of our assets, I felt the ground beneath me crumble. I was losing everything, my family, my home, my security. And the realization that I was the architect of my own destruction was a pill too bitter to swallow. The day I moved out of our family home, John didn't even need to be there. He had changed the locks and security codes immediately after the court ruling, a clear sign that there was no going back. My access to the life we had built together was revoked, just like that. I was an outsider now, looking in on a world I once belonged to. In desperation, I reached out to Alex, the man for whom I had risked everything. But the support I sought was met with cold distance. "I can't be involved in this," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth I remembered. "It's better if we just move on." Just like that, the illusion of our affair being anything more than a fleeting escape shattered. I was alone, truly alone. The silence of my new, empty apartment echoed the emptiness inside me. The limited visitation rights to my children felt like a lifeline, yet even that was tinged with the pain of my losses. Each visit was a reminder of the life I had forsaken, the trust I had broken, and the love I had lost. As I lay awake in the quiet of the night, the full weight of my choices pressed down on me. I had gambled everything on a fantasy, and I had lost. The path forward was uncertain, paved with the consequences of my actions. But it was a path I had to walk, a journey of redemption I had to embark on, not just for my sake, but for the sake of my children. The journey would be long, and the road to forgiveness, both self and from those I had hurt, uncertain. But it was a journey I was now forced to take, one painful step at a time. The day I moved into the small, one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town marked the beginning of my new reality. Gone were the days of spacious living, comfort, and the security of a family home. Now, it was just me and the few belongings I could call my own, cramped into a space that felt as foreign as the life I was now forced to lead. My once wide and supportive social circle had evaporated, with most of my friends siding with John, leaving me isolated and alone. As I unpacked, the silence of the apartment was a stark reminder of the loneliness that had become my constant companion. The friends I thought would stand by me through anything were conspicuously absent, their allegiance to John a clear indication of where their sympathies lay. The reality of my tarnished reputation and its impact on my personal relationships was a bitter pill to swallow. Finding affordable accommodation had been a challenge, a stark reflection of my new financial status. The job market was not kind to those with a scandal hanging over their heads, and my professional reputation had taken a hit from which it might never recover. I had managed to secure a position, but it was a far cry from the career I had built over the years. The pay was barely enough to cover my expenses, leaving me to count every penny and forego the comforts I once took for granted. Amidst these struggles, the thought of my children kept me awake at night. John had enrolled them in counseling to help them cope with the divorce. A decision I knew was the right one, but it pained me deeply that I couldn't be there to support them through it. The limited visitation rights felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of everything I had lost. Each visit with them was precious, yet it underscored the vast gulf that now lay between us. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, each one a test of my resilience. The job was mundane and unfulfilling, but it provided a necessary distraction from the turmoil of my personal life. Slowly, I began to adapt to my new circumstances, finding small victories in the challenges I overcame each day. The apartment began to feel less like a prison and more like a home, a testament to my determination to rebuild from the ground up. In this new life, there were no illusions of quick fixes or fairy tale endings. Every step forward was hard-earned, each day a lesson in humility and the strength of the human spirit. The road to redemption was long and fraught with obstacles, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. It was the realization that despite everything, I had the power to redefine my path, to build a future where the mistakes of the past no longer defined me. This journey was mine alone, a path of rediscovery and, perhaps, forgiveness, not just from those I had hurt, but from myself. The morning John left for vacation with the children was a stark reminder of the new dynamics of our lives. As they drove off towards new horizons, laughter spilling through the open windows, I stood in the doorway of my small apartment, the weight of solitude pressing heavily on my shoulders. This was their fresh start, a journey towards healing and happiness without me. Left behind, I faced the daunting task of navigating through the aftermath of my actions, alone. My isolation deepened when I visited my parents. Expecting comfort, I was met with disappointment. "We never thought you'd be capable of this," my mother's words cut through me, a blend of sorrow and disbelief in her eyes. My father's silence was even more condemning. Their disappointment was a tangible thing, pushing me further into a chasm of isolation and regret. Meanwhile, John's life seemed to flourish as mine unraveled. News of his promotion at work reached me through the grapevine, a testament to his resolve and focus. It stung to hear how he was thriving, becoming a figure of respect and sympathy in our community. People admired him for his strength, for rising above the personal turmoil I had caused, while I became a subject of whispers and judgment. In my loneliness, I reached out to old friends, hoping to rekindle lost connections. But the reception was lukewarm at best. "It's complicated," they'd say, or, "We've just been really busy." The unspoken truth hung between us, the trust we once shared had been eroded by my actions. Each failed attempt at reconciliation was a reminder of the far-reaching consequences of my betrayal. Amidst the judgment and isolation, counseling became my sanctuary. Sitting in that room, week after week, I confronted the guilt and shame that had become my constant companions. "You need to forgive yourself before you can move forward," my counselor would say. It was a simple advice, yet the path to self-forgiveness seemed insurmountable, a journey fraught with reminders of the pain I had caused. When John and the children moved to a new house, it was a symbolic severance of the life we once shared. They were leaving behind the physical reminders of our marriage, making room for new memories, untainted by the past. The news reached me like a distant echo, another sign of the widening gap between our worlds. In this landscape of loss and transformation, counseling was my beacon. It taught me to navigate through the wreckage, to find strength in vulnerability, and to start laying the foundations for a new life. Each session was a step towards understanding, a slow journey towards healing and, perhaps one day, redemption. As John and the children embraced their new beginning, I was left to build mine from the ground up. The road was long and uncertain, with no shortcuts to redemption. But it was a path I had to take, not just for my sake, but for the sake of those I had hurt. In the quiet of my solitude, I began to understand that rebuilding was not just about mending broken relationships or restoring a tarnished reputation. It was about rediscovering my own worth, learning to live with my mistakes, and finding a way to forgive myself. The news hit me unexpectedly during a casual conversation with a mutual friend. "John's seeing someone," she mentioned offhandedly, not realizing the weight of her words on me. He was not just moving on. He was actively seeking a healthier relationship, something I had carelessly thrown away. The realization was like a fresh wound, reminding me of the consequences of my actions, not just on me but on everyone involved. Shortly after, the stark reality of my financial situation became impossible to ignore. The support payments, minimal as they were, became a mountain I struggled to climb each month. It wasn't long before John's lawyer sent a formal warning, a stark reminder of the potential legal consequences should I fail to meet my obligations. The tone was professional, detached, but the message was clear: failure to comply would not be tolerated. In desperation, I began to sell off my possessions. Jewelry, electronics, anything of value that could help me scrape together enough to cover the payments and my living expenses. Each item sold felt like stripping away pieces of my old life, a tangible loss that mirrored the emotional emptiness I felt inside. Then came the news that seemed to seal my fate entirely. John's new partner was moving in with him and the children. The information came through the same network of once friends, now distant acquaintances, who watched my fall from grace with a mix of pity and disapproval. This new development signified more than just a change in living arrangements. It was the final piece in the restructuring of the family I once belonged to, a family that had now moved beyond my reach. Living alone in my small apartment, far removed from the comforts and stability of my previous life, the full impact of my choices finally settled in. The space was not just physically smaller. It felt symbolic of the reduction of my world, my influence, and my relationships. Gone were the days of family dinners, weekend outings, and the casual, comfortable love that I had taken for granted. As I navigated this new, humbler existence, the reality of my situation became impossible to ignore. The choices I had made, driven by selfish desires and a reckless disregard for the consequences, had led me here. This wasn't just about financial struggle or social isolation. It was about confronting the person I had become in the long, difficult road ahead to redemption. With each passing day, the challenge of rebuilding my life loomed large, but so did the understanding that this was a journey I had to undertake. Not just for my sake, but for the sake of my children, and for the hope of one day restoring some semblance of the family we once were, even if from a distance. The path was uncertain, filled with obstacles and likely setbacks, but it was the only way forward, a chance to learn from my mistakes and, perhaps, to find forgiveness in the eyes of those I had hurt the most. The day they brought the dog home, I heard the excitement in my children's voices over the phone. "Mom, you won't believe how cute he is. Dad says we can name him." Their joy was infectious, yet it served as a stark reminder of the widening gap between us. John and the kids were moving on, building new memories, ones in which I played no part. The addition of a dog to their family marked yet another step away from the life we once shared together. Attending my children's school events became a test of endurance. I could feel the distance, an invisible barrier that my past actions had erected. The awkward exchanges, the polite smiles that never quite reached the eyes of the other parents, the space they left around me, as if my failings were contagious. Each moment underscored the isolation I had brought upon myself. Watching John there, confident and engaged, only deepened the ache of my own displacement. When my children casually mentioned John's engagement, it was like a punch to the gut. They spoke of his fiancée with an innocence and acceptance that broke my heart. The news was not a surprise, but hearing it confirmed, especially through the words of our children, made it all too real. It solidified the end of any lingering hope I harbored for reconciliation, marking the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. The regret that filled me was profound, a mixture of loss, guilt, and a deep yearning for things to have been different. In the midst of this turmoil, I took a step that surprised even me. I started a blog, a place to share my story, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't about seeking sympathy or absolution from faceless readers. It was an attempt to own my mistakes, to offer up my journey as a cautionary tale to others who might find themselves at a similar crossroads. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to process the guilt and shame that had become my constant companions. Each post I published peeled back the layers of my facade, revealing the vulnerable, flawed human beneath. The blog quickly became more than just a personal project. It connected me with a community of people who had faced their own battles with infidelity, divorce, and the long road to self-forgiveness. Their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs mirrored my own, offering a glimmer of hope in a sea of despair. This step, putting my story into the world, marked the beginning of a long journey toward rebuilding myself. It was a path fraught with challenges, moments of backsliding, and the ever-present weight of my past. Yet, it was also a path illuminated by the possibility of redemption, of one day finding peace within myself and, hopefully, in the eyes of those I had hurt. As I continued to navigate this journey, the blog remained my beacon, a reminder that while the past could not be changed, the future still held the promise of something better. With each word I wrote, I edged closer to understanding, acceptance, and perhaps, forgiveness. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose, a belief that even the deepest wounds could heal, and that out of the ashes of my greatest mistakes, a new, more authentic life could